German airline.
Guten Morgen.
Post.
Dankeschön. After we have prepared ourselves for this journey, it's now up to you to pick out the things we have to see in this country called Deutschland. Oh dear, you want to know what you ought to see in this country called Deutschland? Can't you ask me something easier? Deutschland. What do you think of when you hear that word? You over there. Just what do you expect here? Autobahnen, Volkswagen and Mercedes? The stylish world of the Kuhdamm, the famous Kurfürstendamm in Berlin? And probably the Reeperbahn in Hamburg, the wickedest mile in the world where anything goes. And of course München, Munich, with beer and more beer, and the Oktoberfest. Yes, all that, definitely. And what else? Gartenzwerge, garden gnomes, right? Oh yes, and nude bathing, naturally. And then there's romantic Germany. The Drosselgasse in Rüdesheim, Schloss Neuschwanstein, and Heidelberg, of course. Yes, there's all that. But not just that. This country, called Deutschland, is a bit more than that. Has a bit more than that to offer. For example, when it comes to romanticism. You can find lots of things here that really are romantic. The sort of things that stir the romantic imagination. You can move back into the past here, into the seemingly so harmonious world of the Middle Ages. Parts of this world have been preserved. In some places, though it's just the idea, the dream of the Middle Ages, what you see wasn't actually created until the 19th century by the Romantics. But if you ask me, as far as I'm concerned, things don't always have to be on such a massive scale. Simpler and not so packed with historical significance. That way, things often mean more to me. This country was always right in the middle of things. It's always had more direct neighbors than any other country in the world. And it's absorbed so much from outside as well, from others. Would probably be for you just to look around with an open mind and then tell me what you think of as typically German. But before you start expecting too much, I ought to tell you that almost everywhere you go, what you'll find is a completely normal, modern European country, with all the contrasts of our times. A country with patina and gleaming steel, a country with the ability to reconcile the seemingly irreconcilable. And there's no reason at all to think that every spot in Germany deserves to be greeted with, "Oh, how beautiful." There are far too many contradictions for that, and not just in appearances either. And the people here, the Deutschen, what can one say about the Germans? Those who say that people are all the same just aren't looking straight. The Germans are just like the country itself, full of contradictions. Why don't you take a closer look at the people here? Compare those you meet up in the north with those you meet down in the south. They are as different as the sea and the mountains. With those down there, you can be almost sure that they've got Austrians or Czechs in among their forefathers. While up in the north, it's probably Danes or Dutchmen. The Romans didn't just bring us the wine, and that's why someone growing wine on the river Moselle doesn't just have a different job from someone making cars on the river Isar. They're worlds apart, and not just in appearances. To be sure, we are an industrial society, but that certainly doesn't mean that everybody works in industry. Statisticians are always claiming that we do a lot of trade, but very few people actually seem to be merchants or have anything to do with that kind of thing. I don't really think there's much point in generalizing about the Germans. All that one can do, perhaps, is say something about the people in Germany. For one thing, the people you come across, they are often not Germans at all. Again and again, I've realized that the people here can be very friendly and very grumpy, loud and quiet, sociable and eccentric, tactful, coarse, realistic, dreamy, open and reserved, conservative and progressive. Yes, and several of these things at the same time as well. There's always some truth in all this, and in the opposite as well. It's always a question of just whom you meet, and when you meet them. It's a fact. The people here can still be described as hard-working. But I don't think that at the end of the 40-hour week you'll find anyone eager to show you just how hard-working they are. The Germans, too, have learned that people don't live to work. One thing I can't tell you, though, is just why, when work's over for the day or the week, they seem to have an irresistible urge to get away from wherever they spend their day-to-day lives. don't know. I don't know. I can't tell you exactly. I can't tell you why they take their fun so seriously. Perhaps it's simply tradition, or what passes for tradition here. Oh yes, there's something else that you should perhaps know. When you land in Frankfurt, you're more or less in the middle of things, but you're not in the capital. And you actually couldn't be in the capital. It may sound strange, but that's the way it is here. This country's got a lot, but it doesn't have a capital, at least not a real capital. The small, narrow city of Bonn, which used to be a dreamy, sleepy sort of place, is now kept busy acting out the part of seat of government. It unfortunately doesn't have space for much more, but in the little space it does have, half the world seems to be rubbing shoulders. And that provides a cosmopolitan sort of atmosphere, or at least it tries to. In this, but only in this, it recalls Berlin a bit. Berlin as a capital. Even though today's Berliners look back on that time with nostalgia, it's worth remembering that Berlin was actually only the capital city of Deutschland for 74 years. For a much longer period of time, one that left its stamp on it more, it was the capital of old Prussia. But that's a completely different story. In those days, there was a king of Prussia, and not just him, and not just then. For as long as the Germans can recall, almost their entire history seems to have been dominated by countless kings and princes and dukes and such like, each with his own land of one size or another, and his own capital of one size or another. At the beginning of the last century, and what even then was referred to as Deutschland, there were no fewer than 39 sovereign and independent states, and a great deal in our present can perhaps only be explained by reference to the past, I think. And that's why I have to mention those princes and such like again. Although very different from one another, they had one thing in common, a love of splendor and magnificence. They were always fond of beauty and always keen to give it expression. It was an ornate time with a frank delight in luxury. The experts talk about the flowering of the Rococo. Posterity gazes in wonder and tends to forget the suffering it entailed for most of the subjects of the time. And perhaps, too, we had a few too many highnesses and a few too many beautiful court ladies and courtesans who all had to have their own little Schloss, perhaps. But I don't know a single city in Germany which would willingly give up one of these heirlooms. And if these aristocratic art patrons hadn't been fortunate enough to have such talented craftsmen around, we today wouldn't have these splendid expressions of their unbridled vanity as part of our cultural heritage. If you feel like it, if you really feel the urge to get really close up to royal luxury, wax and all, you can do it here. You can let yourself float back into the past and see for yourself just how much variety this country owes to all these different rulers. After all, even our music is really a heritage of our aristocratic past. With a little goodwill, you might also interpret the ambitions of the princes for a theater of their own as another expression of their love of art, but in fact it probably had more to do with love for the ladies of the ballet. Anyway, in this way we've inherited one of the most varied theater landscapes in the world, with theaters in even the tiniest towns. On to another aristocratic heritage, art collecting and art collections. Every town and city today has its own museum, either inherited or built itself. And I don't know a single museum director who lets his passion for collecting be bounded by any borders. In that, they're just like the princes of old. In fact, their interests are even more international, even when they profess modesty and call themselves something simple like National Gallery. After all this, a stranger might think that the artists in a country like this must be really on to a good thing. But like almost everywhere else, that stays within bounds. In fact, usually within very narrow bounds indeed. The people who do well for themselves here, again, like almost everywhere else, are the businessmen. Where they rule, it isn't really very typically German at all. It's usually more typically European. But that was probably always the case, and not just here either. Tja, and that isn't German either, even though it often looks like it, and people tend to assume it is. I'm afraid I have to admit that we didn't invent beer. It's just that down through the centuries, we've done our bit towards improving the art of brewing, and at least in downing the stuff, we can claim a certain modest ability. And please don't ask me the best place to eat. You can eat almost everywhere, and in almost every price category. And if I really wanted to confuse you, I could point out that there are very few types of cuisine which aren't represented here. But perhaps I shouldn't go into that now. The same thing applies to hotels. For a start, there's a wide selection. And for another thing, you've got a good chance of getting to know and experience Gemütlichkeit. I know that you use the word too. It can't be translated. Perhaps because it can only be described in pictures and not in words. Like I said, something to be experienced, and you'll find Gemütlichkeit will soon come very naturally. I know that's not always easy, but I also know a few laudable and likable characters who always seem to come up with something when it's a question of enjoyment. Other people's enjoyment, that is. But before you get the wrong idea, I ought to be fair and tell you that you won't really find places like this at every corner. Not even in every city. What you will find, though, in almost every larger city are international hotels. International hotels where you can feel at home. And there's also the opposite of that. Places to stay where you can feel far away from home and in a different age as well. And whether you think of the things you see there as some sort of apparition or as reality depends largely on how much the wine has stirred your imagination. At least the local tourist officers do all they can to create the necessary illusions. I don't know if you'd enjoy something like this. But if you're looking for something like this, we've got a few more places like this. Quite a few more. If you ask me what I like to do now, I'd perhaps go where the world just stretches out in front of me, seemingly endless. Or else, I could well imagine just dreaming my time away in the mountains. Or else. Hello.
Am Flug Lufthansa Flug 931 nach Düsseldorf durch Ausgang B2. Departure Lufthansa Flight 031 to Düsseldorf, Exit B2.